Hello, I'm Chancellor Ronnie Green. Thank you for joining me for today's Nebraska Lecture. This distinguished lecture series features some of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's most notable scholars, researchers, artists, and thinkers. At Nebraska, we believe in the power of every person. For about 2 decades, the Nebraska Lectures have showcased some of Nebraska's finest scholars, people who embody the spirit of this institution and are committed to sharing their knowledge with the public. Our speakers are renowned experts in their fields. They are scholars who strive to collaborate, breaking down the barriers between disciplines. They are educators who are committed to mentoring and shaping the next generation. They are problem solvers who have spent their careers addressing some of society's most pressing challenges. I am so proud of their accomplishments and dedication to our university and the state of Nebraska. Thank you to the Office of Research and Economic Development, the university's Research Council, the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute, and other partners for making this lecture series possible. I hope you enjoy today's Nebraska Lecture.
Good afternoon. I'm Bob Wilhelm, Vice Chancellor for Research and Economic Development at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. I'd like to welcome you to our Fall Nebraska Lecture, which is part of our Nebraska Research Days programming. This speaker series features some of Nebraska's finest scholars, researchers, artists, and thinkers. As a university, we've been exploring the 7 grand challenge thematic areas on which to focus the university's expertise and resources. In initial community building events during the last 2 months, we've brought together faculty from across disciplines to discuss how we can work together to develop strategic, goal-based solutions. Today, I'm pleased to introduce Julia McQuillan, Willa Cather Professor of Sociology, as our Nebraska lecturer. Julia has given a lot of thought throughout her distinguished career about the importance of welcoming changes to the status quo, which is key to solving our grand challenges. Adding social scientists to the mix of perspectives, expertise, and skills can bring important questions to help teams reach new insights. It also can bring tensions, disruptions, and unease. Using insights from research on group processes and status dynamics, we can be more thoughtful about ways to have tensions and disruptions lead to more positive outcomes for more people. Julia's perspective is invaluable as we find ways to build teams and processes with new partners and collaborators both inside and outside the university, and we're excited to present her lecture this afternoon. She joined Nebraska faculty in 1998, served as director or co-director of the Bureau of Sociological Research at UNL from 2005 to 2021, served as the director of the Survey Research, Statistics, and Psychometrics Core facility, and also as chair of the Department of Sociology between 2012 and 2020. Throughout her career, Julia has studied equity issues in areas such as families, health, and higher education, and has helped to develop evidence-guided practices for communicating complex scientific concepts to the public. Julia holds a doctorate in sociology from the University of Connecticut. Please stay tuned for a live Q&A session with Julia and Chancellor Ronnie Green after her lecture.
Thank you, Vice Chancellor Wilhelm, for that lovely introduction. I'm honored to be able to give the Fall Nebraska Lecture. I'm also honored that Nathan Meyer and the Research Council selected me to give this talk today. I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. We'd like to begin by acknowledging that the university is a land-grant institution with campuses and programs on the past, present, and future homelands of the Pawnee, the Ponca, the Oto-Missouri, the Omaha, Dakota, Lakota, Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Kaw peoples, as well as the relocated Ho-Chunk and Sac and Fox people. Please just take a moment to consider the legacies of more than 150 years of displacement, violence, settlement, and survival that bring us together here today. At the University of Nebraska, we respect and seek out inclusion of differences realizing we can learn from each other. And we look forward to building long-lasting relationships with the indigenous peoples of Nebraska. I took this land acknowledgement from the Native American Coalition. It was written by Chuck Hibbard, Nebraska Extension Emeriti. As often happens with academic talks, the time between sending in the title and today brings some reflection and refinement. You might notice that I left 2 words off the title slide, seeking equity. One of my colleagues challenged me and said, don't you want to have your talk speak to all teams and not just teams seeking equity? I said, yes, of course. I meant this talk to be for all of the Grand Challenge teams. And he said, but they're all supposed to have embedded in every Grand Challenge the goal of equitable solutions. Why would you even need to say that? I'm glad he questioned me about that, because he's right. I didn't look carefully enough at the whole webpage for the Grand Challenges and how much equity is baked in and part of the DNA of every Grand Challenge explanation. So I hope you'll forgive me in changing the title just a little bit, and I hope this will be an example of how asking questions, allowing there to be disruptions or tensions, can hopefully help us do a better job with seeking solutions. And also that even though I'm a sociologist, I might have blind spots, and that's why I'm hoping we can share sociological perspectives, imaginations, and mindfulness in all of the work that we do. I also hope that all of you will think about, how would I make a pitch about my discipline or my community or my business or where I'm a stakeholder, and how I matter to every Grand Challenge team. I'll tell you, it's been a fantastic experience for me, and I hope that this talk will reflect that. So it seems like physical science teams pretty much go to social scientists when a funding agency says, we need you to have a social scientist on your team. It may not be the case, but it's what it's felt like to me most of my career. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about a physical scientist, a physicist, Duncan Watts, who came across the question, how rigorous are social science methods? He was in his first year of graduate school in physics, and his roommate had read a book by Howard Becker, in my world somebody very famous, a social scientist, who wrote a book called Tricks of the Trade about social science research. And Duncan Watts' roommate said, it's so obvious. Why do they even have to write this down in a book? This should be common sense, how we solve important problems like poverty and racism and inequality. Duncan Watts, the physicist grad student, thought about that and said, well, wait a minute. We've actually sent people to the moon. Rocket science is pretty good at rocket science, but we still have poverty, we still have inequality. Maybe these problems with human beings are a little bit trickier than some of the physical scientists think they maybe really are. He ended up doing a postdoc in sociology and trying to figure out, using network science, can we answer these really hard questions? It made him wonder about this idea that everything is obvious. And if you see, his title also has an asterisk, because if you cleverly hid at the bottom of his page, everything is obvious once you know the answer. He came to this conclusion after reading a large report that was based on soldiers in World War II, over 600,000 soldiers. And they were trying to figure out a lot of things about these soldiers. What makes a better soldier? Who has a better life? The report was written by Paul Lazarsfeld, and Lazarsfeld gave some of the results and said, what do you think? Does this seem obvious? Do we need to do this huge study to figure this out? One of the things he looked at was who's in better spirits in the Army, people coming from cities or people coming from urban areas? Well, if I tell you the answer, whatever I tell you, you'll say, that's obvious, and this is why, because that's how our brains work. Our brains will come up with a solution. They'll make something fit. I'm not going to tell you what the answer is. You can read Duncan Watts' book, but I will tell you that some things that seem obvious may not be. And that's where sociology can come in, to figure out when is it obvious, when is it not? When does common sense actually solve problems, and when does it not? Common sense is great for basic things like navigating campus or having Thanksgiving dinner with your family, which may be more complicated in some years than others. but it's not great at necessarily solving larger problems with lots of people involved. So in this lecture, I want to bring a social science or sociological perspective. I'm going to focus on the one I know the best. I am a sociologist. Some prior research, some theories, some research methods. This I do in every interaction I have. I cannot turn off my sociological brain. I'm always thinking about power relations, inequality, dynamics. The trick of it is, I can't tell when I'm thinking something's obvious, when I'm thinking it's something I should take for granted, because I take it for granted. All of us do that. That's when we need each other to help us point out, what are your assumptions as a physicist, as a quantum physicist, as somebody who does science literacy or health inequality? What are your assumptions about how the world works? I need other people to question me, and I question other people a lot as a sociologist. So my big question is, what is valuable about disruptive questions and productive tensions? This seems like a funny thing to put in your title if you want people to invite you to the party. I'm going to bring disruptive questions. I'm going to bring productive tensions. You might want to say, thanks, but no thanks. We would like calm and peaceful meetings. What I'm going to try to argue is that you'll actually have better solutions if you're willing to put up with some of those disruptions and tensions, that it really is worth it. And that we can ask the question often when we say, oh, what we should do to bring more people in, to get more people to do what we want them to do, to have them love our idea or change their behavior to save the world, is maybe we should look at the research on that. Maybe we should find out if we need to do new research on that. Okay, so let's look at grand challenges. If you're part of the university community, you should be pretty familiar with the grand challenges by now. There have been lots of gatherings, community building, announcements. Our research fair is full of wonderful opportunities to learn more about the grand challenges. Over 500 faculty on campus helped to come up with what our unique grand challenges will be. And our administration is aligning our grand challenges with our End 2025 strategic plan. It's something that I hope, the people on the steering committee hope, the people involved, everybody on campus will find some part of the grand challenges that they can connect with. So let's figure out what is a grand challenge. Our university webpage for the grand challenges defines them as problems or opportunities of such magnitude that, if addressed, will positively impact society. They have their origins in complex causes and require a combination of transformative, interdisciplinary approaches to solve. They cannot be solved by one discipline alone. They can't be solved by one person alone. If they could be, they wouldn't be grand challenges. It's kind of a very exciting idea for a sociologist because we have to create groups, bring people together. So baked into this premise of the grand challenge process is the idea that our community, with partnerships outside of the university, can serve the greater good, can serve the greater good. Now, that raises a question. Whose greater good? Do we all have the same greater good in mind when we ask this question? Does every group agree on what would be a greater good? If you think about it, these challenges that we have here on the slide, anti-racism and racial equity, climate resilience, early childhood development and education, health equity, sustainable food and water security, science and technology literacy for society, and quantum science and engineering. Many of these grand challenges evolved because people before us made decisions that led to the situation we're in now. I think about the climate resilience grand challenge. I really wish that was slowing climate change grand challenge. It's hard for me to read that the grand challenge is, how are we going to live with climate change? How are we going to be resilient? So I hope we have an all hands deck mentality, but I also hope we're willing to ask questions about, do some solutions serve some groups or people or places better than others? And how can we make sure we get every voice at the table in a way that we can really listen, so that our solutions don't create some new problems for folks we haven't thought about or in a way we don't know. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. Okay. So every grand challenge also has a societal dimension. People who will benefit from going down one path versus another. Now, some of us might feel like I automatically belong. If I'm a physicist working on quantum science, then I automatically belong to that grand challenge. I am a sociologist working on health equity, so that's an easy place for me to fit. If you're in education college and you're already working on early childhood development, you might say, I own that. That's my committee. But my understanding of the grand challenges is that we want to figure out a way that people that don't necessarily think they would fit on any one of these might have something to bring, and they might want to open up and question that possibility. We also don't want to have automatic gatekeepers. I'm hoping we can keep the communities and teams as open as possible for as long as possible, and really ask each other, what perspective do I think might not fit that might help me think in a new way? One of the amazing things about several of these grand challenges, and also one of the frightening things, is that they are existential. They are about survival, food and water security, climate resilience. These are whether or not humanity will stay surviving on the planet, or at least many of us. That kind of a situation can bring people together with a common larger goal where they'll subsume some of their small differences and say, hey, maybe we have more in common than we thought. At least this is what social psychologists tell us. And this is an opportunity to find out, how can we reduce preventable deaths by taking action now? From my limited understanding, the one that's hardest for me to see myself in is quantum science and engineering, which makes me the most curious about it. I want to find out more. And if this has to do with broadband or energy or communications, then really it's fundamental to all of the other grand challenges. And if we can't figure out anti-racism and racial equity, again, we're not going to have the dynamics we need to get solutions that will work for all of us. Okay. I just want to point out that sometimes we can think, we know that one group's knowledge is insufficient, or knowledge alone is insufficient. So here's my argument about this. I am sure you've heard health messages about drinking more water, getting more sleep, not having your phone in your bedroom, brushing your teeth and flossing every day, eat more vegetables, eat more fruit, walk and be physical a certain amount. We know what we're supposed to do. We've heard the messages. We don't always do them. So one of the things I'm going to argue here too is that even when we're trying to educate the public with science literacy and technology literacy, we need to understand people's emotional responses and their meaning responses to what we're telling them. So what is sociology, and how can it help with group processes and grand challenge solutions? This is a really big question. I was thinking on the way that giving this talk that my colleagues in history don't necessarily have to explain their discipline because youth have it throughout their lives. Or my friends in psychology don't necessarily have to explain their discipline because it's part of our everyday life. But sociology, usually people don't take it until they're in high school. They may not take it at all. They might not take it in college. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about sociology. Sociology is the study of social life, social change, and the social causes and consequences of human behavior. This is the definition from the American Sociological Association. You'll see, I have a picture of some youth playing a game. What I'd like you to imagine for a minute is, how would you explain your discipline to middle school youth? I try to do this on most Thursday afternoons through a National Institute of Health grant where I'm trying to help youth understand network science dimensions of sociology for careers in health. This seemed like a big sell until we were part of a pandemic. And then the idea that social connections could matter for the spread of disease was a pretty easy sell. There's other aspects of network science that matter for health that are a little harder to convey. I really wish that all of you could have some Play-Doh right now. Play-Doh makes learning about sociology a lot more fun. The kids really like it, and you can see they're interacting. It's about social life. Pretty much when people ask me what is sociology, I ask if people are involved. If people are involved, we could probably bring some insights. One of the things the youth in this picture are doing is they're figuring out what is the role of a liaison, a connector between two groups. On our campus, we need connectors sometimes between disciplines. We need connectors between students and faculty, faculty, students, and administration. Sometimes we need connections between colleges, the Engineering College, the Institute for Agriculture and Natural Resources, College of Business and Law, or our Fine and Performing Arts colleges, or architecture colleges. When we sometimes meet each other at a national conference or at a community event, and we say, hey, you're interested in this as well? We're a big organization. It can be hard to find those connectors and those liaisons. Working on grand challenges together is a great way to find other people who care about similar things. Okay, here comes the art part. I've been thinking for a couple decades about the metaphor of a mobile, a piece of art where we have pieces connected and balanced. If you look at this mobile, you'll see lots of different colors, sizes, and shapes, and connectors. And you might imagine, where would I be in this mobile? Would I be one of the big blue pieces? Would I be the one yellow piece in the middle? Would I be the connectors, one of the 4 pieces on the bottom, or the white sort of triangle, what I think as the forward part? Where would I fit? And what would it look like? What would the world look like from other pieces on the mobile? Now, if I tell you, which I'm not sure you can see very well, that the name of this piece of art is the peacock, then do you see it in a new way? Do the pieces start to fit together into a pattern that you can imagine as a peacock, even though it's quite abstract? This is sort of what a sociologist tries to do. We try to go from the particular, the individuals, pull back and try to see, is there a pattern? And these connections really matter, because you can imagine this artwork hanging, and if we were to remove a piece or add a piece, it wouldn't just matter for that little part of the artwork. It would matter for the whole mobile, possibly, right? That would be a question. How would we change all of the connections and connections to connections? Maybe degrees of separation out. I wish I could hear your answers right now. I wish you could tell me what you're imagining and thinking. This is why we need groups. And I want to make the argument that groups are more than an aggregation of people. This is a definition that comes from two social psychologists, Cartwright and Zander, from 1968. So for a moment, I want you to think, what's the difference between people together and the people together that actually form a group? A group, the members identify themselves as members. They might say, I'm part of the anti-racism team. I'm part of the quantum team. I'm part of the health equity team. The members interact. They are connecting, listening, communicating, trying to understand each other. The third one is members have shared goals that require some interdependence with each other to attain those goals. And fourth, members share a set of expectations, rules, or norms that limit their behavior and guide their actions. I'm going to talk a little bit about that number 4, norms, rules, guides for interacting, because it's really important for creating teams that will take full advantage of all we have to offer. But I'm also going to tell you that the Office of Research is on the case, and they are offering a whole workshop on how to do that. Okay, in the world of sociology, C. Wright Mills is kind of famous. He's known for coming up with the idea of the sociological imagination or perspective. And he wrote a whole book on this, and I'm going to give you one quote. The sociological imagination enables us to grasp history and biography and the relations between the two in society. History and biography. Mills was trying to make the distinction between a personal trouble, something that's unique to one person, that's part of their biography, say a decision to leave a job or change your major in college, and what's happening in the larger society. What are the trends that might constrain or facilitate some people making one decision versus another? Things that seem really personal and intimate. Durkheim looked at suicide rates. Others might look at the decision to marry or name a child. These things seem very personal and intimate, and yet when we gather the data and look at patterns, we find that there are historical trends. So what might seem very personal can actually be part of historical trends. And C. Wright Mills was looking at that link between our individual biographies and historical trends. So here's a little bit of Sociology 101, which of course takes a whole semester. Let's use the example of how does the world of work how does the world work, and how to identify if you are a sociologist. So sociologists ask the question, how does the world work? But they don't just ask in general, because that would bring in atoms and wavelengths and physical properties. We're focused mostly on how does the world of people work. Instead of just giving you Soc 101 for the whole semester, which we don't have time for, I'm just going to ask you a few questions that we ask undergraduates to answer to see maybe sociology is for them. Now remember, you don't have to become a sociologist. You can just bring one to your team, or you can bring the perspective. So sociologists might often ask, why are things the way they are? Why do traditions or common sense thinking persist when they don't seem rational or practical anymore? Might ask what we typically take for granted and be genuinely curious. Why do we do things that way? Why do we have a tunnel walk? Why do we form a big N at the beginning of the semester? Why do we line up for tickets instead of just all go out of order? Why do we raise our hand in a classroom, but not usually at the dinner table when we want to speak? Others suggest that sociologists take the news too seriously, get pretty worked up about inequality. If you're fascinated by popular trends and wonder what makes them appealing, you might have a sociological imagination. You might wonder about those trends, and you might like talking to people. Why do you believe that? Why are you interested in those shoes? Why would you go for that hairstyle? Why would you pick this university or topic to study? What if you like digging around in data, trying to look at patterns? You're really excited about vital signs in Lincoln, Nebraska, and why people's life expectancy varies by their zip code. Maybe you're concerned or angry or upset about society-wide problems such as racism or sexism or wealth inequality, and you wonder, why does it persist and how can I help? If you're worried about people who seem to be blamed for the situation they're in, when you can kind of see wider patterns that contribute to it, you might have a sociological bent. If you think that humans have the capacity to make meaningful, positive change that exists in our world, you might have a sociological bent. Okay, one last one. If you really like the writings of Malcolm Gladwell, he's a popularizer of sociology, and you might have a sociological bent. In addition to the sociological imagination or the sociological perspective, social psychologist Michael Schwably argues we can have sociological mindfulness. Sociological mindfulness helps us think about questions such as, how is the social world created by people? How do infants become functional human beings, which is relevant to our early childhood education grand challenge? How are we interdependent with others, which is relevant to all of our grand challenges? How is people's behavior a response to the conditions under which they live, which is a very important question. If we want to change people's behavior, we might want to focus on the conditions under which they live. How does social life consist of patterns within patterns? How do contingencies shape our fates? Now you might say, wait a minute, does that mean luck matters for our life outcomes? Yes, there's an argument that it does, but that our opportunities for good or bad luck can be shaped by where we are socially in hierarchies and how much we can handle good or bad luck. How is power exercised and who has more or less power? Power is always relational, so a sociologist analyzing power will ask, between whom, among whom? How is it defined? How are inequalities created and maintained is something we'll pay attention to if we have sociological mindfulness. And how we create valid and reliable knowledge about the social world. And perhaps that last statement by Schwably is the most important component of sociological mindfulness. Biggest argument for bringing sociology to our grand challenge teams. Now, many of us have a tendency to say, things are just the way they are. There's not much we can do about it. And it can seem like some things we take for granted cannot be changed, and other things seem like they should be easily changed. I'd argue that the recent global pandemic that we're all living through helped us see many things that we could change we never thought we could. Last summer, over 700 instructors at UNL took workshops on how to teach online. The summer before, it was about 30. It's a dramatic change in a short amount of time, not only for people taking the classes, but for the people that from the Center for Transformational Teaching that were teaching the workshops. They had to figure out how to meet huge demand. Pretty much every day we're learning about another supply chain issue, another part of our lives that we took for granted that we no longer can, that airlines won't cancel hundreds of flights because they don't have enough workers. These are things that that might cause us to have sort of a sense of vertigo, or vicissitude, of rapid change, because we thought we knew the world, we thought we knew how it operated, and all of a sudden there's dramatic change. It can reveal to us that much of what we know about the world is actually based on social agreements. Many of us might take this opportunity to reflect and to question our old tendencies, our habits and obstacles to change that might before have seemed impossible. And while the pandemic has been just horrible and gut-wrenching in many ways, and many of us have experienced very hard losses, it's also opened us up to what might be possible that we didn't think actually could be possible. And maybe we can take this opportunity to rethink what we take for granted. I often wonder, sometimes we'll have a intervention such as surgery or medication when in theory it seems like a behavior change would be easier, like maybe accepting different sizes of people rather than focusing a lot on changing people's physical appearance to fit a norm we're not sure who came up with. But it seems like many more people choose the medical intervention instead of the social, let's change the norm. Although maybe that is changing too now. It's both a really challenging time and a time when we can think, what's possible? Okay, so let's use the sociological perspective to think about the unusual time that we're living through, this history, and the fact that maybe we don't all experience it in the same way. Our biographies may be intersecting with this unusual historical time. How we experience the global pandemic might depend upon whether or not we stayed going to work in a physical place with other people, such as a meatpacking plant or a hospital, a grocery store, or if we were able to move home and had to juggle our kids and go to the playhouse in the backyard to do a Zoom and have some quiet from our house. If we could afford to have deliveries to our house, or we still had to go to the grocery store, if we were immune compromised. All kinds of personal biography characteristics and where we are in our life course could shape how we experience this historical trend. Yet, many of us really did have very similar experiences. Now, when it comes to other major changes like anti-racism protests, we also might experience that very differently, depending upon our experience of historical patterns of racism and inequality, whether or not we were protesting. What's different about protests now than in the past? Many of us all of a sudden are questioning things we've taken for granted our whole life, either that police are a problem or police are a solution, or there's someplace in between. Maybe thinking about taking for granted healthcare will be there when we need it, or we've never had comfortable access and couldn't afford it anyways. So much is up in the air right now. On a lighter note, I'd like to say that even though I'm a sociologist, I thought I was the first person to think that if I could work from home, I could make sourdough because it takes so much time, and I was home and I could jump up and fold the bread, add some flour and add some salt or water. Of course, I wasn't the only person to think of that, and flour was in short supply. I felt pretty silly as a sociologist thinking I should have known better, that global supply chains would be disrupted and the things I take for granted might not be there. That's why I need other people to ask me questions. I can't tell you how often I've been on research teams where I'm the only sociologist and I'll say something and the engineer or a physicist or a biologist will say to me, "Aren't you supposed to know this? You're the sociologist." I was like, yes, but I'm blind to my own taken for granted ideas about the world and why I need you to ask me that question. And I'm grateful you did it in a kind way. Okay, so here we go. How can sociologists potentially battle COVID denialism? Well, a colleague of mine, Brooke Harrington, who I don't know personally, but I absolutely adore her article in the Chronicle of Higher Education, argued that understanding stigma, the idea of social death, and why sometimes getting a vaccine in secret is perfectly rational, is one of the reasons why sociology can, as I quote here, make visible a whole range of interpersonal motives and group-level dynamics that are otherwise overlooked by American policymakers. Many people with PhDs in sociology work in public health. Sometimes they might even think of themselves more as an epidemiologist than a sociologist. This article shows that if we only look at knowledge, vaccines operate on a certain principle, our virologists are telling us the science behind them, we're missing a lot of the dynamics that go into whether or not people decide to get a vaccine. And if we don't look at how people understand the situation they're in and what it means to them, then we'll really miss an opportunity to be as helpful as possible. This brings up one of my favorite quotes in sociology. This quote is from 1928, hence slightly sexist language. We could substitute, if people define situations as real, they are real in their consequences. And one of the later versions from Thomas and Thomas uses this language. We can think about how we can have different definitions of situations based on our filters, our understanding and experience, lived experience of the world. Most of us in my world, in the academic world, assume that if we could just explain the knowledge to people, they'll do what we think they should do. If they could just understand the world from my virology, biology, physics, chemistry perspective, they would act in a certain way. And what sociology tells us is we maybe should start with how do the people we want to communicate with, and maybe this might be many people, understand the world and meet them where they're at. Now, I'm going to just take one moment and tell you about a project we have right now that's combining sociologists, virologists, and artists to try to communicate in a creative way the meaning of vaccines and try to reduce vaccine hesitancy through art. Because all of the experts on our team, even the artists, the virologists, the sociologists, biologists, the One Health experts, we don't necessarily know all the different groups in society and how they perceive and feel about things. So we're asking artists, please bring your art. This is funded by the National Institutes of Health. It's a supplement to an ongoing grant. And help us communicate in a way that can reach people, maybe at an emotional level, maybe at a non-conscious level, to be more open to helping us all out by getting vaccinated. Okay, one more idea of applying our sociological imaginations, our sociological perspectives to a real world situation. This is one that I've been working on for about 30 years this fall. My first gender equity study was a salary study at a hospital, and that was 30 years ago this fall. I'm going to talk a little bit about the difference between one woman deciding that she will go into or not go into or stay or leave in a science, technology, engineering, and mathematics field versus large patterns of women and men entering and leaving these fields. So one woman was a mathematician, and she was at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, and she was asked to share her story about why she left Carnegie Mellon University after many decades of building a women in science center. And she felt an accumulation of small sexist acts and being excluded over time, even from the center that she had created, as this story in the Pittsburgh newspaper reports. So for her, staying was too hard because she could not handle the accumulation of exclusion. Others stay and have vibrant, wonderful careers. They don't experience microaggressions or small comments or exclusions. Others stay and try to change their institutions. But as her one experience, how common is that? Well, another way to look at this question is looking at very large patterns over a very large amount of time. This graph goes from 1967 up to 2017 and shows some of the major STEM fields, looking at the proportion of people in those fields earning a PhD that are women. And you can see in 1967, there was almost no women in engineering. but there's been an increase up to almost 20% over the decades. You can also see that some of the fields had ups and downs over time, some historical trends that may be more than individual decisions. You can also see that mathematics actually did start to have a decline, slight decline in more recent years. The peak was in 2007. So these broader historical trends might create a context for any one woman's decision or one man's decision or someone on a spectrum of gender. The National Science Foundation 20 years ago, this year, founded Advance. It was intended to try to increase women. The goal was to increase the representation and advancement of women in academic science and engineering careers, thereby contributing to the development of a more diverse science and engineering workforce. To try to make our national science and engineering workforce more heterogeneous and thereby bring in more talent, more ideas, more knowledge. Now, they did not say, let's change the women to make them fit. They said, let's change the institutions. Let's think about the universities and the broader professional organizations, and let's look at the culture of those institutions. Culture is part of what sociology studies, norms, taken for granted practices and behaviors. Let's look at institutional structures around hiring, around dual career hiring, around promotion policies, around whether or not we have a child care facility or family leave that may differently affect women faculty and academic administrators. Part of the National Science Foundation's multifaceted strategy to broaden participation in STEM, according to the call, was to support the critical role of foundations in advancing the status of women in academic science and engineering. And our university applied 3 times for one of these advanced grants. And in 2007, I was asked to be part of one of those teams. I had just earned tenure. I was pretty excited about being able to have a lot of job security. And then I got a request to look at a proposal and give feedback. And I did. I wrote all over it with my sociological imagination, and I talked about what we could really do to change the university. Little did I know that my notes were going to go to the Vice Chancellor for Research, and I would soon be called into his office and asked to be part of a team. It was very exciting, and it was challenging. Now, one of the things we did was collect data, and one of the things we found was that the assumption that the university would be mostly made up of men with full-time caretaker partners without a job, this faculty profile, actually wasn't true. Our data showed that most of the faculty at the university in science, technology, engineering, and math was actually people who have a spouse that's employed. But the university maybe didn't have as many structures in place in 2005, 6, 7 to facilitate that. So we were looking for mechanisms for change. This is my leverage image, this blue image of leverage to try to think about where could we have the smallest effort with the biggest impact. Now, I just want to show you quickly how diverse our team was. The 5 members of our leadership team changed over time. But if you look at this slide, you'll see we had people with PhDs in English, veterinary medicine, physical education, earth and atmospheric science, mathematics, engineering, and sociology. It was really exciting. And I'm imagining that our Grand Challenge teams will have even more diversity and more exciting teams. We were just trying to change one university. We were trying to figure out generalizable knowledge from that we could share with other universities. With our Grand Challenges, we're going to be looking much broader with our partners outside of the university. If you're interested in what we found about how that changed between 2008 and 2013, what happened here at the university, and did we move the needle? My undergraduate research assistant, Nestor Hernandez, and I published an article this summer that was trying to evaluate how much change came with that 5-year intervention. We focused a lot on quantitative numbers at the university, and I'll show you a little bit of that change in a moment. But what we really learned when we reflected was that a lot of the change is very hard to measure. A lot of it's at the cultural level, and we're still seeing the ramifications and ripple effects years later. What I'm showing you here is the actual proportion of women in each of the colleges, College of Arts and Sciences, STEM, Institute for Agricultural and Natural Resources, College of Engineering. And then the black line is our comparison groups, which were all the social sciences across campus. And you'll see the general trend is to more women in those fields where the comparison groups got to a little bit over 50% by 2020. We have 20 years of data. Engineering increased, all of them increased somewhat, and some had a little bit more of a bump during our advanced grant. But what I realize is that it takes a long time to make change when you don't have a lot of hires and you have a recession in the middle of your grant. We also did some fancy hierarchical little linear models to test if the rate of change was different between these groups. And we see a steeper, impressive, I think, increase among the Institute for Agricultural and Natural Resources. But when we do the statistical test, we don't find that that rate of change is actually different before, during, and after the grant period. When you think about it, we had the whole census, not just a sample, so the meaning of that statistics is a little bit questionable. Again, if you want to see the full article, you can certainly look it up. I just want to emphasize that we're going to be having to do hard work. And it may feel like some days we're not making an impact on climate resilience or health equity or early childhood development. We might feel like these grand challenges are overwhelming. And what I want to suggest is when you can step back and look at the long view, you can sometimes see change happening years later that you planted the seeds earlier. The university now is on an amazing anti-racism journey with our chancellor and with now having a diversity office and a vice chancellor for diversity. We're part of a national movement called Aspire that's sharing best practices across universities to really make transformations to be more inclusive. One of the things you find when you try to make change, as the quote says here, the more we tried to change, the more we discovered barriers to gender equity in academia. Some people argue that we know what to do, that social science haven't figured out, and we just don't have the political will. We don't have a definitive answer on that right now. Okay, I'm showing you a slide now that shows a beautiful path through an orchard. And what I'm going to urge you to remember is that equity efforts, we might say, how many efforts do we need to make and for how long? And what I'm going to encourage you to say is, we're just going to keep on going. We're going to keep going down the path and co-create it together. We're going to monitor and we're going to keep clearing the path. We're going to keep in dialogue because new issues come up as complex societies keep going, and the university is a complex society, and we're interacting with systems outside of the university. So if you want more on that process of applying the sociological imagination, I offer the article that was published this summer in a special issue called Real Life Conundrums in the Struggle for Institutional Transformation. Now get ready for a sociological diagram that's going to make you think of our mobile peacock. This is a quite complex model of gender as a social structure. You will not be quizzed on this. You will not be tested on this. I just want you to show you that what had been a simple model of gender at the individual, interactional, and institutional level as a structure that Barbara Risman argued in 1998 has now grown, modified, changed, along with a lot of efforts to create more gender inclusion with a stronger inclusion of culture. What I'm trying to tell you is this is hard, and we'll work together. And we have fantastic resources at the university. My colleague Jordan Solis in Communication Studies did a really powerful talk at one of the community building sessions around reducing racial bias through intergroup contact and dialogue and opportunities for interdisciplinary collaborations. And our fantastic Office of Diversity and Inclusion has many opportunities to learn how to build really powerful groups and teams. I'm also going to make the case, the business case, because I want the business college involved too, and because all of us have to think about where are we going to put our return on investment. And the recent book by Heather McGee, which follows up on a talk she gave here last year, I'm pretty sure Ndenke Friday from the Office of Diversity brought her here as a speaker, talks about how we all have a positive dividend when we work on reducing racism. There's not a zero-sum game. There's a multiplier effect where we'll all have more of a pie to share. I also want to remind us all of the work of Scott Page, who did many simulations of models and found that repeatedly we all have benefits from teams with diverse perspectives. But the other thing I'm going to remind you is that it doesn't mean it's going to be easy. When we have people that don't share our perspective, we have to ask, why would you say that? Where are you coming from with that? How did you come up with that idea? What is your definition of the situation that makes sense? And can you hear my definition of the situation? So Scott Page argued that when we have more diverse groups and firms and schools and societies, we can come up with more creative and better solutions, but the process is going to be more challenging. One of the things that really helped me was going to a practice session called Ouch. It's pretty simple, but as much as I want to tell you that we need disruptive questions and productive tensions, I actually really like it when everybody just gets along. I'm very uncomfortable with tension and disagreement. I have to practice saying, I'm not sure why you said when we hire the director, he will do X, Y, and Z, because it says to me, you assume we're going to hire a man and we haven't even written the ad yet. I want to be able to say that at a meeting and have you go, oh, thank you for making me see my default assumption. And I appreciate when someone says to me, the preferred language of the Navajo Nation is to refer to our community as a nation, when I inappropriately use a word like tribe. Those are the kind of situations I want us to all to live through and say, ouch, or I feel funny, or I've got a hot flash because I wish that I didn't say something that was offensive to someone else. And yet I want to be on teams where someone trusts me enough to say that. And as a sociologist, I see it most of the time in other people, but not in myself. So I need teammates who can do that. I've also participated in Husker Dialogues, I think, every year, and I learn every year from the new students how to practice being courageous, being brave, and sharing my truth. Okay, very quickly, our fantastic Office of Research has this diagram of the world and where our research connects with others around the world. We're already doing a lot of the things that I'm arguing we should do. And before I even knew it, the Office of Research is offering workshops that will help with building teams and developing a diversity plan. Okay, now, a few examples. What use is sociology for teams seeking solutions to grand challenges? Well, to meet the growing demand globally for animal protein, we probably need a lot of chemistry, biology, additive manufacturing. Why would we need sociology? I'm going to make the case. How about health disparities and infertility? Don't we just need some biomedicine? Why would we need sociology? I'm going to make the case. And then public understanding of science. Don't we just need accurate knowledge, good teaching, good messaging? Once again, I'm going to try to convince you that it's a good idea to have sociology involved. I've just added the grand challenges to my 3 examples because I'm putting where I think those grand challenges fit with these ideas I'm going to tell you about from my own research history. Yes, I've tried to place all 7 of the grand challenges into one of my research areas. I'm going to start with meeting demand for animal protein and make the case that it's more than engineering. So there's this mechanism that the National Science Foundation has called an Engineering Research Center. And in 2018, I got a phone call asking me if I would be willing to be listed as a sociologist on an Engineering Research Center grant. These are very large grants that are multi-institutional, have stakeholders in society, and are multi-year. So just quickly, an Engineering Research Center, this is from the call, is to maximize positive social impact. Right there, positive social impact. We probably want social scientists. To maximize positive social impact and any anticipated potential negative consequences caused by the introduction of an Engineering Research Center, technology might be addressed. In these cases, make sure to include stakeholders. That's all of you listening who are not necessarily part of the university, but care and work in your communities, that will work to mitigate the negative impacts, such as regulatory institutions. I hope you can see just from that call that we need social science. But now I'm going to bring you into the very complicated in some ways and very simple in other ways Engineering Research Center model. As the diagram shows, sociologists are relevant and perceived as integrated because society is the big loop on the outside. It's a big part of the model in engineering research centers. And the inner loop, you have the scientific enterprise, then inner loop again is the engineering community, and then the ERC is at the core. And what are those green loops that are woven through all of the Engineering Research Center? That's innovation ecosystems. That's where we have our small businesses and startups around the state. Our culture of inclusion, which I've been talking about the whole time. Our workforce development, making sure that we have folks wanting to and ready to go into a new field, a new industry, and then convergent research. And I'm just going to read you the quick definition of convergent research because this matters for all of our teams in such a powerful way. Convergent research is high-risk, high-payoff research ideas and discovery that pushes the frontiers of engineering knowledge. ERC convergent research is a deeply collaborative, cross-disciplinary effort that results in positive societal impact. Convergence blends multiple disciplines in engineering, sciences, and social sciences, says it right there in the convergent definition, in a coordinated, interdependent way, and fosters robust collaborations needed for successful inquiry. I had the tremendous honor to be part of an Engineering Research Center application. I could talk a little bit about what was in our planning grant. I won't be able to talk about the proprietary information in our bigger grant, but I can tell you that I was 1/4 of the research team. So I went from being just listed on the grant as a social scientist to having conversations where the team realized that similar to other innovations in food, if we don't really understand how people see what we're doing, they won't want to eat it. So we need to learn what social and cognitive dimensions of stakeholder needs, that would be producers and people creating new foods, and perceptions, and people who would eat it, perceptions impact acceptance of emerging food technologies. We need the definition of the situation of the people we hope to meet their needs. So my part of this large project was to test theory-guided hypotheses to inform food science and engineering decisions with information about stakeholders. It was incredibly powerful to have a team of mostly engineers, computer scientists, biochemists, biological systems engineers want my perspective, and to work for multiple years on trying to figure out how could we feed the need for growing demand for food with limits to land and water, right at the center of the grand challenge around food and water security. I got to imagine what I could do as part of a team that had built-in stakeholders, and I kind of let myself have a lot of fun with fantastic collaborators from anthropology, psychology, and my other teams, and think about working directly with communities. We could do community-based participatory research like many of our extension faculty do. We could work with extension directly to figure out who are the key people to talk to. How can we have win-wins for rural prosperity? How could we understand what are the true needs and meet those instead of deciding what people need? It was very exciting to think about systems and feedback loops. These are complex problems just like all of our grand challenges. I won't go a lot of detail, just to say that it's really an honor and very exciting to be a true partner in a really big grand challenge. And I hope we all get that chance. Okay. It was a unique opportunity for social science because it's rare that I can have access to producers and consumers, stakeholders, and all of those involved in the supply chain. Being part of the big Engineering Research Center brought me to ask questions of my colleagues I'm on City Campus, they're on East Campus, and they work directly with people across the state to ask them for help. How can I meaningfully connect and build long-term win-win relationships in communities across Nebraska? Now here's the thing at a university, when you ask for help, they put you on a committee. So I got to be invited, and I'm very honored to be part of Rural Prosperity Nebraska. Every one of the grand challenges could benefit from partnering with extension faculty and with the researchers and colleagues in Rural Prosperity Nebraska. Okay, very briefly, health disparities and infertility. 20 years ago, I was part of a team that was part of a similar incentive, but this time we had to connect with the medical school. And we wanted to know, can we study infertility at the population level? Can we take it out of the clinics and more broadly to the population? This is really important because less than half of the people that experience infertility actually go to a clinic. And who are those people? Are they more likely to not have health insurance? Are they more likely to not be white, like the posters and advertising for infertility clinics? What we know is that women of color are more likely to meet criteria for infertility and less likely to show up in those clinics. $50,000 of seed funding from the university turned into an over $3 million grant to survey over 4,000 women and 3,000 of their male partners, and over 40 publications and a large data set, two-wave data set that's available for the public. And what we found is that there's a lot about infertility that has a social dimension. In fact, if people meet the biological criteria for infertility but they don't want children, they're probably not going to pay attention to the fact that they're not conceiving. They might even be grateful. So we've done a lot of research in the area of health equity and health access when it comes to something that's seemingly biological but has tremendous social dimensions. Now, public understanding of science is another area that I'm very interested in. I came to that through my infertility research and realized that if the public doesn't understand what infertility is or understand the ethical issues involved in treatment, then they might not make the best decisions. Also, I used to be the director of the Bureau of Sociological Research and helped found the Survey Research Statistics and Psychometrics unit on campus, which turned into the Social Behavioral Research Consortium. I got to know a lot of people around campus, which you'll see briefly at the end. And one incredibly powerful science communicator, Judy Diamond, invited me to be part of her work communicating virology to youth and the public. One of the questions she asked me was, why do you always talk about race and gender? How do you know that it matters? This was kind of a painful question for me to get. It was so much a part of my default assumptions that it should matter that I was a little offended to be asked. But it was one of the best questions she ever asked me because our team really struggled with, what does that mean? And what I came up with, and we came up with, was we thought people who had certain status characteristics might be less likely to claim a science identity. And we know if they're less likely to claim an identity, they're less likely to follow the behavior. So if middle school youth hear the word science and they count themselves out because of the color of their skin or their gender identification, we're losing a lot of people we want to help with our grand challenges. So after working for years on faculty, I started working with middle school youth and learning a lot about partnerships, collaboration with the public schools, after school, artists, and virologists. And one of the things we did, as you can see in this slide, is we asked about a concept we came up with called discovery orientation, which measures a propensity to go into science, but doesn't use the word science. So we can see if gender and race actually matter among youth. We suspected it didn't, but there's clear evidence in our survey of one middle school in the Midwest that there's no differences in discovery orientation. Youth have high curiosity, high wonderment. They want to discover, take things apart, explore. When we do specifically ask, are you a science kind of person? The numbers go down, but they go much further down on average for boys and girls of color and girls of color. The boys who are white have much higher automatic assumption that they could be science kinds of people. And when we ask youth, middle school youth, do other people see you as a science kind of person, this reflected image of myself, the numbers go down substantially. So we've started working with offering courses from the sociology department for science and math teachers on how to activate youth STEM identities, create textbooks, activities, lessons, language, images to up those numbers. Okay, I'm showing you one kind of complicated slide just to maybe show off that we are kind of scientific with our path models and our concepts and equations. But what the big message here is that to go from a discovery orientation to a science identity, youth need to see it as relevant to them and they need to enjoy it. It's not just you'll see no line from their perceived ability, their grades. Most of the scientists I talk to think it's about hard work and smarts, and what I'm telling you is at the middle school level, we just need to keep kids seeing, if I learned how to do this math or this science, I might help my family, I might help my community, I might discover a cure for something, or I might create access to healthcare or better housing or reliable food or a house that doesn't have a toxic mold in it. We have a funding from the National Science Foundation This grant, Worlds of Connections, is the third Science Education Partnership Award. Judy Diamond earned the first two. We're extending her amazing work on science communication. I have had so much help with this talk. I want to just take one moment for that team, everybody on that team. You can see here in this slide, Devin and Christine, Judy, Kirk, Megan, Trish, Bilal, Megan, Ash, Wendy, and Amy have helped me with these ideas, but I take full responsibility for the things that don't make sense. Again, I'm showing you the youth in our after-school program because I learned from a fantastic collaboration with the University of Omaha Any STEM for You program, created by Christine Kudakake, where she developed a way for undergraduates to lead programs and after-school programs for middle and elementary school youth to keep the college students in college, to keep them committed. And she has lots of evidence that over 6 years of work, it works. The college students stay, they have a science identity, they see meaning and purpose. I was curious about the middle school youth. What do they get out of this program? And could she help me and her team help me figure out how to communicate network science to middle school youth when I have a hard time understanding it myself? So we have an article together where we're looking at trying to franchise what she created and learning about this conundrum. I, as a sociologist, was so focused on the content knowledge. She, the tumor biologist, was focused on relationship building and community building, and helped me see that if I first had a solid community among the college students and spent time building community among the youth, then they would then be open, feel safe, take risks, and learn enough of the knowledge to want to keep learning. She's created a book of activities. Some of these activities are free and available on the Any STEM for You webpage, and we have 4 activities about network science. It's been a fantastic collaboration for me. It's been a multiplier effect of our ability to reach our goals. And I'm really excited. We have 4 network science activities, and we're collaborating on more. I also figured out, by working with teachers and people who collaborate in the school systems, I learned more about next generation science standards. And I hope all faculty at the university can learn about next generation science standards, because what I've been learning is that what we have all in common are these cross-cutting concepts that youth are supposed to learn all throughout their science education. And the one that I focused on is systems and systems models, which I discovered that my colleague Jenny Kashwani on East Campus was also focusing on for her science communication. It was really exciting to be in a Zoom meeting and see one of our favorite books, Thinking in Systems, in the background on her shelf. We instantly bonded and learned a lot from each other, and that shaped a whole class we offered this summer with math and sociology with Wendy Smith, working on this cross-cutting concept of systems and system models and bringing that to networks. Here's an image of how our youth are using a hula hoop to create a network in the after-school program as a metaphor for our club. That when everybody pays attention, is careful, and tries to lower the hula hoop together, we have a smooth operation, even though we have to keep our fingers straight. But if we're not paying attention, we're not seeing the club as a thing that we all care for together, we can't get that hula hoop to straighten out. And that's how we talk about building community in our clubs, and I hope we can do the same thing with our teams. Okay, comics. Yes, comics. We've had several years, since 2012, we've been doing research on the wonderful artwork and science that Judy Diamond's been leading. My role has been to say, is it effective? Does it work? Or is it at least not as bad? And what we found is that it actually helps the kids with low science identities engage more with science. This Corona comics that you see here is our one of the newest comics. Judy Diamond got a rapid grant from NSF. 1 year, she created 4 amazing sets of comics that are free and available for download, and then a series of essays to go with the book. So I hope you check that out. And if you are like me, reading at a middle school level about virology is a fantastic way to get in the door and connect with my colleagues. And we have an essay in there, my colleagues and I, on network tracing of the pandemic and how it's really important to learn about networks. Okay, to wrap up, if you haven't figured this out already, I love to collaborate. I've actually never published anything by myself, including this talk. This is a network map that was created through Research Nebraska. This shows the sociology department and all the other units it's connected to. I'm going to show you this network map another way. This is in a circle, and you can see that sociologists have all kinds of crazy connections across the university. This is from 1998 to 2001. That's the time I've been at the university, so that's what I picked, and at least one collaboration. Now here's my own network. I have over 80 collaborators when I have to do the NSF disclosures about who I collaborate with. And you can see that many of my collaborators collaborate with each other. It's really fun to see what I feel and experience in reality. Here's the circle diagram. I have a fantastic collaborator at a small college in upstate New York, Arthur Greil, who's an amazing storyteller. And so you too could see your networks on Research Nebraska, a fantastic tool for creating teams. So what if you don't have a social scientist on your team? Well, there's lots of ways to find the expertise. We have the Methods and Research Core on campus that's helping with back pain studies and paleontology or sorghum. We have the Public Policy Center that helps with all kinds of research on laws and public understanding of science. We have the Bureau of Sociological Research, which help with focus groups, surveys, going out in the field and collecting data. Fantastic, world-class expertise. We have the Bureau of Business Research that will help you with the economic impact and your claims about the impact you're going to have on the state. So remember, go attend the workshops to learn how to co-create ground rules and to establish ways to be curious and assume everybody's doing the best they can and we have to learn from each other. And when we say or hear something that hurts, we say, ouch. Help me understand where you're coming from. Let me help you understand where I'm coming from. I want to warn you, sociology can be contagious. I worked for many years with Marianne Holmes. You can see here she wrote a wonderful book with her colleagues called Women in Geoscience, Practical Promising Practices Toward Parity. And she has a chapter that I'm very excited about, a sociological framework to address gender parity. You can get infected with a sociological imagination. I've become obsessed with trees and how trees grow and their roots that go down and their branching networks up. So I'm giving you one of my favorite trees. And I'm going to say a huge thank you for people that let me talk incessantly about this talk, because I realized that the challenge of explaining sociology, explaining the research I'm very excited about, and making connections to the grand challenges was probably a grander challenge than I could do alone. I want to make sure to thank Tercera Bradal, Nestor Hernandez, Trish Wanchill, Dan Hoyt, Megan Letterbrand, Nathan Meyer, Dan Mosier, Mark Riley, Amy Spiegel, Regina Wareham, and all my collaborators and team members and the UNL Research Council. Can't wait to see you at more of the workshops about the Grand Challenge.
Well, hello to everyone that's online for today's Nebraska Lecture. I'm Bronny Green. I have the pleasure and privilege of serving as the Chancellor here at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. It's great to be here in studio with Julia McQuillan, my friend and colleague, that does such great work for us at the university, and has been, in addition to that, you've actually been an administrator and been a very successful administrator at the university as well. Wonderful Nebraska Lecture. Julia, thank you for those perspectives and for what you have shared in the lecture today. You know, the Grand Challenges is a big deal for us. We spent a lot of time, as you know, over the last several years defining what grand challenges the University of Nebraska-Lincoln should focus on and concentrate on in our contributions. You know, and you've talked a lot about how to integrate our thinking about those grand challenges and how to tackle them, right? So much food for thought in what you've provided to us today. Now we're going to welcome questions from our viewers today who are online with us. Please use the chat function at the bottom of your screen or email research.unl.edu to submit any questions that you may have in our time here today. You know, I was especially struck by your perspective on how disruptive questions and productive tensions that you mentioned toward the end of your lecture can be a force for innovation and creativity. It seems to me that that approach really is key to looking at these challenges in some new ways maybe that can yield some real solutions. So let's kind of start maybe with a few questions there, Julia. You've got a long track record over 10 years and you provided a number of different examples of things that you have worked on that are very interdisciplinary in their nature. How have you achieved meaningful integration across disciplines? You want to share a little bit about that?
I can sure try. What a great question, and it's just wonderful to be here with you. I'm very excited about the grand challenges, obviously. It's hard. Not all collaborations work out. You have to spend time getting to know each other. One of the great things about the request for proposals is that people can work on building teams and practice talking to each other and be curious about what other folks bring to the table. Often I have assumptions about other disciplines or approaches to things that are wrong. Until I talk to somebody, I heard a philosopher talking about attitudes, and I said, wow, did you interview people? And they might look at me and say, no, I read a philosopher. So really spending some time thinking, what does the world look like from other perspectives, and what could I learn from that? Because no one person can possibly bring everything that we need. So taking some time, being curious, getting to know people. We're probably going to feel like other people are not understanding us or not giving us automatic respect or due. So paying attention when we're in a group. It's very human to figure out what is the status hierarchy, although we never call it that unless you're a sociologist, but sort of who's in charge, who's the leader. And I suspect that the people who are going to be going after the grand challenges are used to being the leader in their group. And when you have several people together who are used to being the leader, we have to figure out, how are we going to make decisions? How are we going to disagree? So I think taking time to talk about that and think about that, going to the upcoming workshops, one of them is about humanizing the grand challenges on November 16th, to think about how do we form partnerships. Also, when we are the university, we have a fantastic relationship with Lincoln Public Schools. They are working with us to help us analyze data and figure out how we can have more youth figure out what they need in middle school to take the classes in high school, so that when they come to university, they can have the majors they want, the math background, the science background. If I go to those relationships and I say, I'm coming from the university and I'm bringing you answers, I'm going to offend a lot of people who are doing great work. So, and same with my colleagues. So I feel like a little bit of an underdog. I can make the pitch. You might want to think about sociology. But and sometimes I've been told sociology is the big dog, and maybe another department might feel like we're the ones that are not listening or paying attention. So I feel like if we can have that be part of our team building, that can really help. And just acknowledge that we might need to pay attention when we are making assumptions that aren't true.
So I'll ask you a technical question.
Sure.
Right? So in academic work, what makes a constructive disruptor?
That's a great question. So I love thinking about this. In sociology, if we can say everybody takes something for granted, and we can test it and say maybe it's not true, maybe it's a paradox, that's very powerful. To be able to say, one well-known one within the world of sociology is the Hispanic health paradox, which is that the second and third generation folks who come from Spanish-speaking South American nations have worse health than the immigrants that come here. Why is that a paradox? Because we think we're the healthiest in the world, right? So anytime we can say whatever we think is common sense, and we say, where is the research? If there's not research supporting that and we find a new way, that would be, to me, a constructive disruptor is one that really radically changes how we think about something and might construct a new path that can solve something we couldn't solve before or help us see something in a new way.
Okay. Well,
it's not like a coined term. It's just how I think about how I end up being on committees. It's not actually a footnoted or a known term. It's something I made up.
Got it. Along those same lines, maybe attention, of course, can be counterproductive. You know, in lots of ways, and many of us are conflict avoiders by nature, right? Where we seek to avoid that kind of tension. How do you make it productive?
So I hope I can talk about times when working on like a big engineering grant, sometimes we're many hours responding to NSF or some other funder, and it can be quite tense. And people can really disagree about what's best, and the stakes are high. And we need to figure out what can make a difference. And if you can hang in there with that tension, I feel like creative artists have this tension trying to figure out a poem or a song, or when you're in a lab and you can't get the experiment to work the way you want it to. Sometimes that so-called failure is a new insight. So the tension could be between disciplines, between people. It could be when something's not working. I remember one of the other grand Nebraska lectures when Joy Castro said, when you feel that pain, that tension, lean in and right there, you know?
Right.
So those uncomfortable times, I think if we can hang in there, that might be where we find things that we say we never could talk about that, right? That's not okay to say. I mean, I'll bring up a challenging thing in the state, which was critical race theory. Oh no, maybe we shouldn't talk about that anymore.
Right.
Well, what happened now is my first week of school, we talk about what is academic freedom, what are students' responsibilities in a classroom, what are faculty members' responsibilities, how do we structure a classroom we can feel safe talking about more conversation when we're uncomfortable instead of walking away. Because if we don't talk about racism in America, things we're supposed to not talk about because it might make it real, well, people who experience it as real.
Right.
So to me, a productive tension is one where by talking it through, getting more perspectives, we create new solutions. I am very uncomfortable with with tensions and disruptions until I'm passionate about an underdog, like a mama bear. Then when I'm fighting for what I perceive as a social good, I can be more powerful. But I also have to listen to people when they say, Julia, I know you're really passionate about that, but I think you need more data. And that's hard when I think I know what's right.
Yeah.
And many times I have to say, when you show me that information or that bigger picture or a part of the world I didn't know, I need to say I'm wrong and learn.
Right. Well, I remember you talked about this in your lecture. When I came back to the university in 2010, the advance work that you talked about was well underway, and that grant was very active on at the time. And I remember learning about it initially and learning from the co-PIs and people that were involved in it. And there was tension there. Right?
Lots of tension.
there was tension there to talk about this issue where it was a real issue, and how could we as an institution really deal with that issue and move it forward. So I get it.
If I hadn't promised the 90 women in STEM we had lunch with when we were writing the grant that I would keep, it was my job to fight for them and their job to do their science, I probably would have quit.
Right, right. So take a little different turn here. So from your perspective, what would an ideal collaboration between natural and social scientists look like? At what stage and what ways would you want to be involved, other than, of course, as early and as often as possible? So
yes, as early and as often as possible. That's a great question. So, I mean, I do agree, as early as often as possible, but I also think all of us have a responsibility to step back and think, what do I have to offer? And it's okay to make the case. Many of us sit in our offices at our computers and we work and we think, why hasn't anybody asked me? I know the answer to that question. And at a university, how do you let people know you have the answer to that question? You join a committee or you offer yourself up. You have hundreds and hundreds of faculty. You can't know what we're all doing all the time.
Right.
So there are some resources, but I do think, and our peers, there's a thing called chain migration. We can also have attractors in, I think it's in, I'm going to get this wrong, but in networks, attractors are when somebody who's already popular, more people attach and say, oh, that's the popular person, I'm going to go to them. But we may need to turn to our colleagues and say, yes, you're already working in an area. Let's imagine, is there any way we could creatively think of that area? Can you keep your research agenda, but also help us answer this question? The fundamental science or the application, is there a way that what you're doing might contribute? And it doesn't mean that everybody on campus has to be involved, although I would love it if they would try to be. We all feel so tasked through everything that it feels like one more thing. It's not. It can be apply what we're already doing to something really exciting. So I think that, and then really appreciate what we all bring to the table. Find the win-wins.
So a little different turn of that is a nice segue to the next question that came in online.
So you're a sought after person. You showed your network right at the end, and what your department's network looked like, and what your network looks like. It can be hard to say no. There's a lot of opportunities that are out there, but it can be necessary. You can feel the compelling need to be involved and need to be there as well. How do you decide which collaborations or projects to pursue or whether to not pursue? How do you say no?
Sure.
Or figure out how to say no?
So it's very easy in my life because my daughter has said I have to say no to anything new. She wants some more time with me. So that's a great question. It is really hard. And I think that when I start with something, I usually say to people, I'm not committing beyond a certain point. I'm going to put my toes in the water and find out if we're a good collaboration. Mm-hmm. So I'm kind of saying two things. One is hang in there and try to figure out how to have hard conversations. But another is to make decisions about what could be worthwhile, right? So in my position as somebody who's been here over 20 years, what I love to do is when people ask me to be a part of something, I like to connect them with other people and say, there's this young scholar who would be great for your team. Mm-hmm. Here's this up and coming postdoc or graduate student, to really share that out and say, you're gonna have just as great or more innovation because they're young and hungry. So part of it is to do that, to really talk to people. I like to be a connector. Mm-hmm. My grant is Worlds of Connections. Yep. And so that's one. And then the other is to me, I try to think of where can I have the most value. So it might not, and also if it can be fun. When somebody says like, we're going to do research in Paris, I would probably say, that sounds exciting. Right now, I'm very excited about Valentine and Columbus and parts of Nebraska that I've been discovering through Rural Prosperity in Nebraska, places where small town mayors are making a huge difference. Right. And when they were undergrads here, and then they did an internship, and then they fell in love with a small town, and then decided to raise their family there, I am fascinated by that. Yep. And I think the pandemic is making many more people think about how could I work remotely and raise my family in a small town? Or my colleague Emily Kazak looks at sexual minority folks in small towns and that they have great experiences. And that's a paradox, right? We wouldn't necessarily think that if we have a city bias and we think the city is more open. Mm-hmm. Well, how great that she did that research. Right. So anyways, the answer to the question is I'm not very good at that and I don't get a lot of sleep. But I hope other people can spread the wealth.
Yeah. Well, Julia, wonderful lecture.
Thank you.
A wonderful Nebraska lecture. Congratulations on being selected.
I'm
it's
honored,
an honor
thank
at the
you.
University of Nebraska to be selected as a Nebraska lecturer, and you're a very worthy person of that honor.
Thank you for your
for
leadership.
what you've done in your career here and continue to do. Thank you for your encouragement of the grand challenges and in thinking through how we attack these grand challenges. And your lecture was invaluable and helpful in that too. So congratulations on a great lecture.